On a hard blue morning in November of 1985, a white auction tent went up behind the Prairie County Savings Office outside Lindsborg, Kansas. Most of the men under it were not farmers. They were investors, speculators, men with folders, financing letters, and clean shoes. And then a farmer rode in on a bicycle. His name was Walter Klein. He was 48 years old. Patched brown wool coat, mud-dark cuffs, boots resoled more than once. He leaned the bike against a fence post, walked to the registration table, and laid down a cashier's check for $172,000. The clerk looked at the check, then at Walter, then at the bicycle. What Walter had come to buy that day was Tract 2. 280 acres of river-bottom silt loam from the Nygaard place, some of the best dirt in the county. And before he ever raised his bidder card, the whole tent was about to laugh at him. The auctioneer warmed the room with the smaller pieces first: a pasture lot, a machine shed, an old house tract nobody wanted. Then he called Tract 2. The front rows came alive. A Wichita investor opened his folio. A banker from Salina slipped out a financing letter. This was the ground they had shown up for. The bidding started fast. 135, 140, 145. Then, from the back of the tent, Walter lifted his card. 148. Heads turned. Somebody in the middle said, "Well, I'll be damned. The bike man's in." The room laughed, and the auctioneer played to it. "Careful now, friend. That's a lot of acres for a paper route budget." Bigger laugh. Walter didn't answer, didn't smile. He just held the card against his chest and waited. 152, 156, 158. Walter again. 160. Now, to understand that silence later, you have to go backward. Walter's grandfather was a German-Russian immigrant named Otto Klein, and when Walter was 10 years old, sitting at an enamel kitchen table, his grandfather told him something that never left him. Anything with a banker attached to it has two owners. In the bad years, only one of them gets to talk. Walter built his life around that sentence. When he took over 160 paid-off acres in 1968, he farmed wheat, milo, and a small cow-calf herd. He ran older equipment, fixed what he could, bought used when he had to buy it all, and every quarter, part of what came in went into a passbook account. On the masking tape label, he wrote one word: land. 17 years. Deposit after deposit. No new tractor on credit, no expansion note, no banker in the passenger seat. Through the 1970s, that looked foolish. Land was climbing. Export demand was hot. It was hot. Every coffee shop in Kansas was full of men talking about who had bought more ground, who had traded up, who was finally farming big enough to matter. Then the ground shifted. Interest rates exploded. Commodity prices fell. Land values broke. And the crisis did not sort farmers by talent. It sorted them by leverage. A great farmer with the wrong paper could be finished by spring. A decent farmer with no note could still be standing in the fall. Walter watched neighbors disappear into it. Lyle Nygaard lost the very tract Walter came to buy. The Bender brothers watched strangers tag their machinery. Darrell Hayes, who once mocked Walter as a museum farmer, ended up driving a fuel truck because the land was gone. Walter didn't enjoy any of it. These were neighbors, men he had stacked hay with, men whose wives sat near Ruth at church suppers, men whose kids had ridden the same bus route. He wasn't smug. He was afraid. And in 1982, when he understood the bottom might not be close, he opened a second passbook. This one carried a different label: When It Turns. Not because he wanted people to fail, because he knew that if the land really came loose, somebody local had better be ready. So he saved again, quietly, without show. A little from wheat, a little from calves, a little from every year he did not borrow to look bigger than he was. Back in the tent, the bidding kept climbing. 162, 165, 168. A Wichita partnership went to 170. Walter raised his card. 172. That was the penciled number inside the ledger. That was the line. Then the Wichita bidder lifted his own card. 173. And now the story tightens. Walter is standing at the back of that tent with his ceiling already behind him. He's thinking about his grandfather, thinking about every deposit, thinking about the previous night when he showed Ruth the number and told her, "If it goes past that, I'm done." And Ruth said only this, "You'll know if it's still your ground to buy." Walter reached into the grain bag and took out a second envelope. Inside it was $4,100 in cash, closing cushion, repair cushion, the money that makes the difference between safe and exposed. He looked once at the penciled ceiling. Then he raised the card. 176. The tent went dead quiet, canvas ticking in the wind. One cough near the entrance, the soft crackle of the microphone. The Wichita man looked at his partner. The partner looked at the floor. A little arithmetic, a little pride, a little fear of pushing farther against a man who clearly was not bluffing. Then, a small shake of the head. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Going once, nothing. Going twice, nothing. Sold to Mr. Klein. Walter walked up the center aisle while everybody watched, past the clean jackets, past the polished loafers, when they saw the bicycle. At the clerk's table, he handed over the cashier's check, then counted out the extra cash from the second envelope, one bill at a time. Signed with a blue bank pen, took the deed packet in a manila folder. On his way out, one of the Wichita men stopped him and said, 280 acres in cash, and you rode here on a bicycle? Walter looked at him and said, my truck was hauling hay. Then he walked past him. That answer stayed in the county for years, but the deed mattered more. Late that afternoon, he pedaled home with the folder strapped to the rear rack under a black bungee cord. The wind colder now, the sun lower, the grain bag empty across his back. When he turned into the yard, Ruth was on the porch. Walter walked into the kitchen, set the folder on the table, and pulled off his gloves. Ruth opened it, read it, closed it. Then she put on coffee. That should have been the end of it, except what Walter had done only looked like a stunt if you saw one afternoon. If you saw the whole decade, it looked like delayed strength. For years, caution had looked weak. Then all at once, caution became purchasing power. That's why the room went so quiet after Walter's last bid. Not because a man on a bicycle surprised them, because everyone under that tent realized what they were looking at. 17 years of refusal finally turning into control. 3 years later, at a church breakfast, a man named Leonard Shaw stepped beside Walter with a styrofoam cup of coffee. Leonard had once farmed nearly 1,300 acres. By then, he was down to leased ground and part-time work at a grain elevator. He asked Walter, honestly now, with no edge left in him, How come, when all of us were signing paper, you never did? Walter said, because a note isn't just money. A note is permission. It lets somebody who doesn't know your fields outvote you in your own kitchen. In the good years, you forget he's there. In the bad years, he's the only voice left. I never wanted a stranger with that much say over my ground. Leonard looked into his cup and said the truest thing he had probably said in years. I used to think you were scared. Turns out you were free. Walter kept farming, bought another 80 acres cash in 1990, another 40 in 1996. Nothing flashy, nothing heroic, just ground bought when it made sense, with money already in hand. By the time he stepped back, Walter Klein had 560 paid-off acres. He died in 2013. A week after the funeral, his son Daniel was going through the roll-top desk in the den when he found a cigar box pushed to the back of a drawer. Inside were 2 passbooks. The first was labeled Land. It ran from 1968 all the way to one final withdrawal, November 1985. Cashier's check, tract 2. The second was labeled When It Turns. And under both passbooks was the old co-op feed ledger Walter had carried into the auction. Daniel opened it. On the inside cover was the penciled ceiling, underlined twice, 172,000, and below it, written later in darker ink, after the sale, after the bicycle ride home, after Ruth had put on coffee, one word: free. That is the truest version of this story. Not that a man on a bicycle shocked a room full of speculators. That is only the surface. The deeper truth is that everyone under that tent saw the same man and misread him. They saw a patched coat and a cheap bicycle and thought they were looking at scarcity. What they were actually looking at was discipline. They saw a man who looked small. What they were actually looking at was a man who had spent 17 years making sure nobody else could make the last decision for him. In a crisis, the loudest men are not always the strongest. The biggest operators are not always the safest. And the man people laugh at on the way in may be the only one in the room buying with his own money. Walter Klein kept the deciding vote, and on one cold Kansas morning, that quiet decision rode into a foreclosure auction on 2 thin tires and went home with the deed.